Welcome to the Huntington Way Show, where we help parents navigate the educational maze. I'm your host, Yvonne Strachan, author and founder of InspirationalHomeschooling.com. I'm speaking with Craig Harrison, and he is an engineer turned homeschool dad. He's had almost a decade of homeschooling under his belt, loves homeschooling his kids. He is the author of Your Child's Best Teacher. Great book, by the way. We are going to delve into this book. We're going to talk about home education from a father's perspective. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors, the Huntington Learning Center and Inspirational Homeschooling, for bringing this show to you. You're listening on Power Talk 1040 AM, 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM. Please like and subscribe to Power Talk 1040 on YouTube. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Hi, Yvonne. It's great to be here.
Great to have you here. I am curious, you're a homeschool dad. So I want to know, first of all, what led you guys to homeschooling, you and your wife? And then why did you decide to be the main educator of your boys, especially with your engineering background?
It isn't something that my wife and I plan to do, to educate our children at home. We fell into it in a way, and I would have to say that I'm an unlikely homeschool teacher. But the way it happened is that I grew up in New Zealand. My wife grew up in Brazil, and we were living in the United States in Minnesota. And our eldest son, we have two boys, and our eldest son was coming up to school age. So we needed to figure out how the US school system worked. And around that time, we had looked at a local school. It was a very good school, and my wife and I had both gone to public school. So that was just our default thought, that our son would go to a public school. But around that time, some other family members started talking about home education, and we decided to go that way. Somebody gave us very good advice not to plan to do it your whole life, just take it a year at a time and see how it goes. And in some ways, it was just easier to teach my son at home than to figure out how to cope with the US public school system, how to get him to school in the middle of Minnesota winters. And so we started teaching our oldest boy at home, and he responded really well to it. And within a couple of years, my oldest son learned to read very early, so he was doing very well. My youngest son, 2.5 years younger, wanted to join in the lessons. I thought he was a bit young. He was still only 4 years old. But then I discovered that my oldest was teaching him mathematics behind my back, and he was halfway through grade 1 mathematics. So I gave up and started teaching him as well. It went really well with them. They both responded well. And so after a few years, we realized they're just doing very well being taught at home, and we couldn't see any way that they would be able to go back into a public school or start in a public school from that point. So we continued. But why is it that I became the teacher? Well, this is something that I never expected to do. I don't know if you know much about engineers, but engineers tend to think that they know everything, and they get very frustrated when other people don't know things, don't understand what seems so obvious. And that was my background in engineering and science and mathematics. And so I was a terrible teacher. I didn't have patience. I didn't know how to explain something that I just knew how to do. My mother was a teacher, and she was wonderful. She was patient, she was kind, she was very empathetic. I wasn't any of that. And so she would have thought it very ironic that I ended up being the teacher. But the reason it became my job is that when we moved to the United States, I spent 5 years looking for work and was unable to get a job. We were living with my mother-in-law in a little apartment with 2 boys, a growing family, and my wife needed to get a job in order to support the family. So I was raising the boys, and I knew that if they were going to be taught at home, it was going to have to be my job. So I didn't intend to. I never wanted to be the teacher, but there was something that I just had to do. And I do want to say as well that it was the best decision we could have made. It was something that in the last few years I've had to think about and come to grips with. But teaching our boys at home was the best thing that we could have done for our family and for them.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. I think it's really intriguing that you say you were not patient and that your mom would say, wow, he's the teacher, right? I think speaking to that point, there are so many parents, they don't have the patience. And I get that comment a lot of times when I'm talking to other people about homeschooling. They're like, oh, I could never do that. I don't have the patience. And so, how did that work with you when you started teaching and you knew that you didn't have the patience? And engineering, by the way, my son is really engineering minded and he does get frustrated and he is always right. So, I can relate to that as well.
Yes, the world would be a better place if everybody listened to us engineers. But that's something that I didn't do a good job of. I struggled, and part of the reason for writing the book was to be able to grapple with this question myself of what it meant to me as a father, being at home with my children. Part of it was also to have the opportunity to think through it, because every homeschool parent knows that there's so much to do each day. You're caught up in curriculum and marking and doing lessons, and then there are the dishes to do and the laundry to keep up with. And it takes a lot of effort, and it's not often that we get the opportunity to sit back and really think about the bigger picture. And so taking the opportunity to write gave me the chance to think about the bigger picture, to think about why we were doing it, and what was good about me as the father being the teacher, what were struggles and challenges that I had to overcome. One lesson that I became aware of, and I consider this to be my greatest weakness, but it can be so many people's greatest strength, is that children will remember how you make them feel much longer than they will remember what you taught them. That, I think, if there's one message that you can take away from this, it would be that the children will remember how you make them feel much longer than they will remember what you taught them. And today, we seem to have an obsession with knowledge. This began at the Enlightenment, when knowledge was elevated above virtue. But we seem to think that knowledge is what education is all about. Education isn't so much about knowledge. We can learn that. But if a child is learning to enjoy the learning, then they will do well. And they won't enjoy it if they're being forced to work through problems and lessons, and the focus is on marks and grades. They will enjoy it if they're having fun and if they're in an environment where they are loved. And that to me is the big difference between school, whether it's a public school or a private school or Christian school, and the home, is that in the home, the parents, the children belong to the parents. They're not going to graduate out of the family. Even if they leave home, they're still part of the family. And it's parents' role to love their children. And to me, that is more important than what they actually learn.
Yeah.
I think you asked about about science and the engineering mindset as well.
Yeah,
And
so we'll delve into that here. We're
sure.
going to take a break and then
Hmm.
we'll talk about the engineering and science.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll be right back. Back to the Huntington Way Show. You're listening on Power Talk 1040 AM, 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM. Please like and subscribe to Power Talk 1040 on YouTube. So I am your host. I'm Yvonne Strachan, and I am speaking with Craig Harrison. And we are actually talking about engineering because he has been an engineer and homeschooling and how this has impacted each other. So, Craig, what I wanted to talk to you about was you have a history of engineering, and I was intrigued by your thoughts on children not studying science to a particular level. Can you share your thoughts on this?
Sure. I worked as an engineer for many years, but my training before that was in science. I have a PhD in physics. A lot of that was high-level mathematics. And science and engineering are slightly different in the approach that they take. But obviously, I am biased towards science, towards mathematics, towards engineering. I accept that. I have tried to make the argument that science is more important than arts, for example. But my artist friend cut me down, and so I don't claim that. I am biased towards science, but what I've come to realize as I've thought about it is that science has value at different ages, different stages of a child's development. And when children are young, they're very curious. The typical child asking why a million times. They want to know about things, and that's the stage when science is very valuable. Hands-on science, letting them explore, letting them learn about the world. There was a study that Ruth Beechick refers to in one of her books that children in a particular school district were split into two groups. One group did intensive reading when they were very young in the first couple of grades. The second group spent a lot of time doing science. And what they found is that the group that was learning to read learned very quickly how to read. The group that was doing science didn't, but the group that was doing science very quickly caught up and passed the reading ability of the children that had had the focus on reading. The reason for that is that when children are doing science, they learn more about the context in which they will learn to read later. And so they had context and concepts and tangible things that they could relate to when they learned the more abstract reading ability. So I believe that science is one of the most important things to teach children, but that applies when they're young. Even though I love science, I don't see the point in every child having to do 3 science courses through to the end of high school. Because when you get to high school, you're learning at a much deeper level. And a lot of people will not go into science. And so there's no point spending that time learning things that they're never going to use. So I now believe that science should be optional at higher levels, very important when they're young. But when you're at high school, learning to express yourself through speaking, through writing, is much more important. And learning history, learning about the world, learning literature, I believe is more important to give you a broad understanding of the world. And I think that even if you're mathematically or scientifically inclined, that maybe particularly if you're scientifically inclined, you should spend more time learning literature and writing.
Wow, that is a really interesting point, especially given your background. And I would tend to agree with that because I look at every relative that I have and all the different ways that they serve. So I have a brother who is more computer oriented in his computer field, one that deals with blood and is an administrator at a hospital. And at some point in person's career, it seems like you switch from being the one doing the work to being the one teaching the next generation to do the work. And I feel like even in grade school versus high school, you're learning and you're building everything up. And then you need to articulate what you've learned and your points and your viewpoints and everything as you go out into the world. And so it would make sense that they would need to learn literature and speaking and so on. And that would be very impactful to add to anything that they have learned previously. And being able to articulate that would be very valuable in life in general. Yeah. So you also talked about the scientific method in your book. And one of the things that I really keyed into was that, scientific method is used throughout life, right? And we often refer to science as truths. So a lot of people in the world feel like, okay, well, this was, figured out scientifically, so therefore it is truth. But that isn't necessarily so. Can you speak to that?
I would love to, because I think that people need to understand that, particularly today, with what's happened in the last few years. It seems that the general population has no understanding of what science actually is, and that it's some magic solution, it's some sort of truth. The most important thing to understand is that science can never prove something to be true. What science does is it repeatedly tests an idea, an hypothesis, and tries to disprove it. So science is all about disproving something. If you're unable to disprove it, then you might increase your confidence level that particular concept is true. But you can never prove it to be true unless you've tested every single possible case, every scenario, every permutation, which is impossible to do. Now, you can develop mathematical truth. I believe that that God works mathematically, and things can be proven mathematically, but they can't be proven scientifically. And so for somebody to say this is the science, or it's proven scientifically, a true scientist will be saying, let me see if I can disprove that, because either I will strengthen the case or I will find that there was a flaw in it. And real scientists are looking to disprove a narrative, not to just believe what they're being told.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And I think we need to be logical thinkers. And I know you had talked about teaching logic also in your book and how that is so important. And we need to have kids that are developing discernment and really logically thinking through things. And as you look at the scientific method and disproving things, it really leads to logical thinking. So I'm kind of thinking about those points and I'm like, okay, so you put scientific method or science as your number one priority, but you list it as your number one priority for a different reason. Why is that reason?
The reason science is so important at a young age is that it teaches us to appreciate the world. And God created a wonderful world. He's given us the ability to think. God is logical as well. And that's what we see in the Bible, that he isn't capricious, he isn't abstract, he isn't he doesn't change his mind. God never lies, and that's reflected in the world that we see. So we can have confidence in what we're seeing in the world around us, because we know that God is a loving creator and that he created the world in this way. And I think that's what I enjoyed about science, is is learning to discover what's happening in the world. I think that that's important for children to grow up being excited about what's around us, not fearful about the future, not fearful about what they see happening around us, but aware of the possibilities. There are people that think that, you know, we've reached a level in our understanding where we kind of understand everything. We don't. And real scientists know that there's always more to be discovered, that there's more and more that we can do. And I believe that that reflects the infinite mind of God, that we haven't got to the point of knowing all that God has created in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points there. I think it's awesome that science for you has pointed to God, and it has many scientists. And it's really interesting because a lot of people look at science as disproving God, but that is not the case. I mean, we can look at math, we can look at the Fibonacci sequence, we can look at the created world and know that it is organized and that God has a plan. So I do appreciate that. Well, we're out of time. So I just want to let everybody know that Craig has written the book, Your Child's Best Teacher. I have read this book. I have a ton of tabs in this book because it is just absolutely amazing. There are so many good points in here, and both scientifically and then also from a homeschool dad's perspective. And so we will meet again if you tune in next week, and you will get some of Craig's sight as a father and a home educator. Thank you for joining us.